Welcome back to Master the Marketplace with Caspian.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Master the Marketplace. I'm Kunal, your host, and I've got with me Director of Compliance and Legal at Caspian, Jed Nelson, to the show. We're going to talk about something special today, which is how do you stay compliant on Amazon? And Jed has done a fantastic job in presenting to everyone here a checklist of what it would take to stay compliant on Amazon. But Jed, first, welcome to the show. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hey, thanks, Kunal. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for inviting me back to be a guest. I've been at Caspian now for over 8 years. I started out in customer service. They decided, that I could help out customers in the beginning, and I was excited to jump on. At the time we were Green Cupboards, and help us to grow and hit $6 million in sales in our first year at the time. And then after that, I worked my way up into a position to help set up our warehouse, our e-tailz processing facility out in the Spokane Valley here in Washington. And then I worked my way into a position where I started on the compliance team, and now I'm the director of legal and compliance for Caspian. So it's been quite a road and quite a bit of growth that we've seen over time.
That's fantastic. Well, the director of compliance is probably the best person to talk to us about how to stay compliant on Amazon. And I know you've prepared for our viewers a checklist of what would it really take to stay compliant on Amazon. I think that would be very useful for us to walk through during this meeting today, during this show today. So, but to get started, and I want to let all our viewers as well as our listeners know that you can download the sheet that Jed has presented. You can find it somewhere on wherever this is hosted. You should get access to that, and definitely use this as you're following along this podcast today. So Jed, maybe give us the big picture first. Give us the 10 steps, and then let's dig into each of them. But if there are 10 things that you got to tell people to stay compliant on Amazon, what would those be?
Yeah. So when you asked me this question first, I was like, create a checklist for everything you need to do to be compliant on Amazon. It's almost like asking, what do you need to be successful in business? And there's a lot of different answers, and there's a lot of pieces that go into it. But that being said, like there's some general themes and some pieces, and I'm hopeful that these 10 things that I put together will help sellers and other Amazon businesses be able to understand kind of, hey, this is where I need to start to begin looking into stuff, and then dig into the specifics and the differences around your own individual business. So, this is the 30,000 foot view it's a good place to start and to look. But if you have more questions or you need more help, by all means, reach out to Caspian. We're happy to help you. We offer agency where you can get access to all the compliance resources and me and my team and what we can help you to be able to make sure you're compliant with it. But yeah, this is there's a lot to know about, and it's very, very, very specific to the kind of business that you have. But in general, I've got 10 things I think you need to keep an eye on. First one, intellectual property rights. Second, making sure your product meets all of the local, state, and federal laws. Make sure your packaging is fully compliant. Make sure your Amazon listing is fully compliant. Make sure that your product meets all of Amazon's policies. Make sure that you have brand registry. Make sure you're monitoring your customer feedback and listening to your customers and trying your best to be proactive in addressing those concerns. Make sure you're tracking your order defect rate and are addressing those types of issues. Make sure that you're following all of the specific policies that are external necessarily to your brand, and that your employees are following those as well. So from what I've seen a few times is multiple seller accounts. And then making sure that you're also following Amazon's reviews policies, that when you're asking for reviews or you want customers to give you feedback on your products, that you're doing it in a way that isn't going to get your account shut down. So that's kind of the 10 up front, and we can kind of walk through each individually.
Let's do that. Let's talk through like IPR first. That's a big one that we hear a lot about. So, how should a brand or a seller think about IPR? What should they do to maintain compliance as it relates to IPR? So give some tips and tricks as it relates to IPR itself.
Absolutely. This is one that I've seen a lot of brands get tripped up about, both in terms of needing to protect themselves from counterfeiters and other people who want to take their hard work innovations and monetize them. But then also brands who haven't really thought it fully through, and as a result end up suspended because they're accidentally infringing on somebody else's intellectual property rights without even realizing it. So the first thing that I would recommend in order to make sure that you are compliant is get your IP together. So what does that mean? That means you get a patent on your product. Your product is patentable. You get a trademark. So if you're selling underneath the Caspian name, the Caspian is trademarked. And that you have the right to use that, and no one else can come along and take that up, and that you've done your due diligence to make sure that nobody else is named Caspian. And then you're also, following copyright law. So in terms of the directions, the packaging, the pictures you're using, that you own the rights to those things before you start selling. And that's mostly if you're a first-party seller. If you're a third-party seller and you're selling somebody else's goods that they manufactured and they own the patent or they own the trademark, then it's important to make sure that you can trace the authorization of the sale. So, and that you have proof of the authenticity of the product. So if you're, going down to Sears that is liquidating in its local brick and mortar store, and you're buying, 40 of a product off the shelf and you're selling it on it, keep the receipt. If you're working with a major distributor, make sure you have a contract with that distributor that spells out that they have the rights to sell you those goods and that you have the rights to sell those online. The contract then provides you with the proof that you're doing it. Or if you're working directly with with a brand, and you are their authorized e-commerce seller, make sure you have an authorization letter or a contract in place that grants you the ability to use their intellectual property rights to sell that brand. All of these are ways to kind of make sure that you're protecting yourself and not accidentally doing something that violates someone else's IP, and that you also have that IP in place if somebody else comes along and starts selling a counterfeit good.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And then, and it's good that you differentiated between, the first party and third party, because, resellers, their process could be slightly different, or what they should be maintaining with them. So that's awesome. That's on intellectual property. So if we move to the next one, which is around just being compliant with state laws, local laws, like federal laws, how would you be compliant with these different laws?
Yeah. So, and this trips up a lot of people. There's a lot of laws out there. So, for instance, did you know that in Chicago you can't sell crib bumpers? Same thing is true in Maryland. There's a law called CARB, or the California Air Resources Board, and it's not a law. It's a board, and they make determinations for products that are sold in California that things like even a cleaner for a boat can technically violate. And these are all things that we've seen over time, that there's just so many different rules and regulations out there, and that it's hard for an average seller to be able to truly understand it. So what I generally recommend brands who come to us or where we're selling their products is to take advantage of the resources that exist out there. So first off, if you're selling something that requires testing, go get that testing. So if you're selling a kid's product, if you're selling a product that comes in contact with food, make sure you have the testing that's applicable to it from a reputable third-party testing agency. And what they'll actually be able to do is they'll take a look at all of the rules. They'll look at state rules, local rules, and federal rules in the country you want to sell it, and they will test it to prove that it is compliant with each one of those, and they'll give you a full report. And then if your product doesn't pass it, they'll tell you exactly why it didn't pass it and what you need to do in order to be compliant. So go ahead.
Just to stop you there for a second, how would you know whether your product requires testing or not?
It's a great question. Most products are going to, well, I would start by understanding your product and Googling other types of products that are like your product. For us, we just have a general understanding. We know the categories that tend to fall into. So in terms of toys, anything that comes in contact with a child or that a child might handle, you're going to be talking about safety testing. Anything that comes in contact with food, you're going to be talking about food contact safety testing. If you're talking about electronics, there's some things that require testing, and then there's also certifications like UL that are like industry standards. The Amazon might require some testing, some local jurisdictions might require some testing, but it aren't necessarily required. If you don't have any idea about what your product needs and whatnot, my recommendation would be to reach out to an organization like Intertech or SGS and say, hey, here's the product I want to sell. can you guys do a review of this and let me know if it needs testing, what it needs tested to, and let them kind of give you some feedback on it. They run entire like parts of their business around doing what they call gap analysis, looking at what you might be missing as far as getting all that information. Also, if you're sourcing out of China, but you're using a larger organization, or if you're really sourcing anywhere in the world, you're working with a reputable manufacturer who knows what they're doing, they might also be able to point you in the right direction. So I guess kind of to summarize, you can Google it, try to find out what the industry standards are for your product. You can talk to somebody who has a lot of knowledge and experience, like someone like Caspian or some of these other agencies that exist out there. You can go to the testing agencies like Intertech or SGS, ask them to review your product, or you can go to the manufacturer and say, hey, what do you know that might be possible for this? And what I often see happen with brands is they start off selling a product and you know they get off the ground and they kind of test what they think it might need, and they try to be compliant on what they know, and over time they begin to learn more about their product. They begin to learn more about the regulations around it. They get restricted in California because it violates CARB, and as a result they then go get the testing or the certification, or they remove that ingredient, and over time they iterate to the point where they're fully compliant and are able to sell everywhere. So I've seen that happen with a number of brands that we've seen grow up over the time too.
Got it. So that's on testing. What else do you need to do to be compliant with local laws or local federal laws?
Yeah, so another thing to keep in mind is a lot of places require registration. So, for instance, electronics recycling, you're required to register in a number of states for your product and to pay their governments a small fee on an annual basis in order to sell products that are considered to be e-waste. So think like monitors, televisions, that kind of stuff. So you got to know where to kind of register. Another thing we've seen happen a lot on Amazon, and Amazon's been cracking down a lot on since the EPA kind of went after them and fined them significantly, is EPA registrations. And basically what that means is there's a lot of products out there that have to have the right registration, the right kind of labeling, and then they not only need to be registered federally, but they also need to be registered in every state where they're sold. And that can be time consuming and that can be costly. There are organizations out there that provide that service to them. But if you're going to be selling in some of these niches, you got to be able to make sure you have those registrations and can demonstrate that you have those registrations to Amazon, or you get your listing shut down.
Interesting. That's great. That's great. Okay. Okay, good. So those are great tips, by the way. So we talked about IPR, we talked about product compliance, as it relates to laws. Then you said packaging. Okay, how do I make sure that my packaging is compliant? Because I wouldn't think, that packaging is a big deal. Like, I could package my product in any way possible. So talk about packaging.
Yeah, so a lot of products require very specific labeling. And you actually can fall into multiple different areas and rules here. So one of the things that we see a lot is that companies will include false claims or claims that they can't substantiate. So specifically, let's pick on supplements a little bit here. So they might say, hey, this treats arthritis, but it's just a supplement. It's designed to supplement your diet. And the way that I always tell people is drugs are drugs that are designed to treat a symptom, a form or a function of your body. Supplements are designed to supplement your nutrition. So if you are deficient, you take an iron supplement to supplement your diet with iron. A lot of times people or brands out there, and this is very common on Amazon, will have something and it might be true. Like I'm not saying that it's not true, but they might be selling a product like paprika and they say, hey, it helps out with joint inflammation and arthritis. That might be true. However, unless you go through the whole process with the clinical trials to add the drug facts to it and get it FDA approved, you can't claim to treat arthritis because that's considered a medical condition. It's a form function claim. So you need to remove that and say, can help to reduce inflammation or something along those lines in order to be compliant with your product. And if that's on the packaging itself, you can't just edit the listing and remove it. You actually have to change your full packaging, which is hugely costly. So for a lot of these brands, what I would recommend is that you make sure that your packaging presents the messaging you want to do, but play conservative with your packaging. Make sure that you're not making any misleading claims. There are also going to be a lot of regulatory data. So for instance, if you're selling supplements, you have to have supplement facts. If you're selling an over-the-counter drug, you have to have drug facts. If you're selling food, you have to have nutrition facts. And those have certain specific stylized guidelines that are required by the various regulatory agencies. Like they have to have certain fonts, be a certain size, etc. You got to make sure your packaging has that. The next thing to kind of keep in mind is you're selling on e-commerce if you're selling on Amazon. So you want to make sure your product can actually hold up underneath all of that shipping and that it's not going to arrive to the customer broken, busted, etc. So the ISTA 6 certification, that's the gold standard. That means basically your product can ship in its own packaging without any additional overbox or anything else, arrive to the customer and be set. You don't have to necessarily have that, but that's kind of like the gold standard. You should be reviewing your products to make sure that the packaging not only doesn't have any misleading claims, meets all the regulatory guidelines, but is going to be strong enough to hold up for e-commerce and present a good customer experience when they received it. And then the final thing that we see hang up a lot of brands on a regular basis is, you know, they're doing well in the US and then they want to go launch in Canada or they want to go launch in the EU. And they forget that they have to update the language. Specific parts of their label are actually required by law to be updated in the language and market they're being sold. Just from like a common sense perspective, if I can't read the label, I'm probably not going to buy it. So from a common sense perspective, it makes sense to market it in it. But in terms of regulations, all of these countries require it to be in the language in which language of the country in which it is sold. So if you're selling in Germany, it needs to be in German. If you're selling in France, it needs to be French. If you're selling in Canada, it should be in French and English. Though there's a little bit more wiggle room there, and I can get into more specifics depending on the product. But yeah, if you're not certain, there's agencies out there that do it, or you can work with Caspian, and we'll point you towards those resources to help make sure that your product is compliant if you want to go launch in another market.
Fantastic. That's a great tip. So let's go to number 4 then, which is verify compliance with Amazon policies, you know, the authorization to sell. So talk through that aspect.
So yeah, so you've got a great product that you want to sell, and you're convinced that, you know, it's gonna do really well. One of the things that you got to do is make sure that it's a product that is able to be sold. So I'm going to pick on a product that we sold way back in the day. It was a vaporizer pen for alcohol. What could possibly go wrong, right? And there was huge demand, and so there was a number of brands who were launching their own devices with it, and then they started selling it and whatnot. Well, they forgot the one small little detail that Amazon's policy restricts it. So as soon as Amazon noticed that these products were selling, they immediately restricted it. All the inventory that was held at their warehouses at the time was just destroyed, and as a result, that like some of these brands, you know, weren't able to make it. So it might be a great idea. You might think, you know, it's gonna do well, but make sure you research Amazon restricted products to be able to sell it. The other thing you got to do is, let's say you are a baby food maker or you're a car seat manufacturer. Those products are available for sale on Amazon, but you have to apply to sell. You have to get special permission. They're higher risk. You know, with all of the news reports and everything else coming out with Amazon not selling things that are compliant or safe, Amazon wants to make sure that they're establishing that customer trust, and so they're limiting who can sell these higher risk products to a handful of sellers who can demonstrate full compliance, who can demonstrate that they know what they're doing and that they have good supply chains, good manufacturing processes, etc., in order to protect customers. And so your product might be allowed to be sold on Amazon, but you might still have to jump through some additional hoops in order to be able to sell it. And then the final piece is making sure that you're meeting all the requirements that Amazon has for a product. And I don't know if many of the viewers or listeners were following what was happening with the hoverboards a few years back, you know, around Christmas, and people were receiving them and they were catching fire. Many of them bought them on Amazon. Well, Amazon took a look at that and said, hey, what we need now is, in order to sell hoverboards on our website, you have to prove UL testing. It's not legally required. It's not something that's happening. They haven't banned it. They're not limiting who can sell it, but they are requiring that everyone who does sell it can demonstrate that they are meeting the UL standards for batteries, and that's properly labeled on the packaging, and that they can look at the certification from a third-party testing agency to verify compliance with it. So you got to make sure you check all those boxes for your product in order to make sure that it gets live. It's got to be able to be sold on Amazon, not restricted. Even if it can be sold, You might have to apply as a seller to be able to sell it. And then even if you've been accepted as a seller and the product isn't restricted, you still got to make sure your product meets whatever Amazon's guidelines are for that specific product in order for it to go live and to be sold.
Fantastic. And then, associated with that, number 5 was around compliant listing content. So now your products, you know that your product will probably sell on Amazon, you're authorized to sell it. What about listing content that can make you non-compliant?
Yeah. So you've got your intellectual property rights for everything. You've verified
Right.
your product's compliant with all the local, state, and federal rules. Your packaging set is good to go. You verify that it's compliant with Amazon policies. You've got permission to sell this product, and now you want to list it on Amazon and sell it. So you got to create a listing content that is compliant. And kind of going back to that product packaging, not only do you have a product packaging that needs to be compliant, but that listing similarly is portraying your brand. It needs to be compliant. So it can't have any of those misleading claims. It can't say things that it's not allowed to say. But in addition to that, on the back of your packaging, you might have, need help or whatever else you might have on your label. You might be able to include your phone number on there. Yeah, you can't do that on an Amazon listing. Any attempt to redirect customers off of an Amazon listing to your personal store or to your website is considered a violation of Amazon policy and can get that listing suspended. You also got to make sure that the pictures you're posting up there, that the content that you're adding, your bullets, your description, etc., isn't infringing on anyone else. You can't go take the other people's copy. And I wouldn't put this up here if I hadn't seen it a number of times. I remember a conversation I had with another seller who was selling a dish rack that was very similar to a product that we sold. And in fact, Caspian had actually taken all the pictures and done all the photography for it. And he was arguing with me, no, I paid a third-party agency. They did a great job. These are beautiful pictures. And I was like, yeah, they're beautiful pictures of our kitchen, literally the kitchen in our office. And I walked down there and I took 2 pictures of it on my phone and I texted him to him and I was like, this is our kitchen. And he was like, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. And took him down. So I throw it up there because you got to make sure that like, you're working with reputable agencies like Caspian.
Right.
We do all of our own photography in-house.
Right.
Make sure we have the rights to give to you in order to put it on your listing, so you're not infringing on the intellectual property rights of others using your listing content. You also got to be careful of variation abuse or misuse. That's when you put non-like products. So you can use a variation if you have 5 different colors of your product, red, blue, orange, green, and purple. Like that's fine. That's a great use. Or if you have multiple sizes, small, medium, large. What you can't do is, I got a hammer with my name brand on it. I've got a saw with my name brand on it. I've got a tape measure with my brand name on it. I'm going to create a variation for those. That's not allowed. And if you violate that, they could pull one or all of those listings down. And then finally, compliant photos, making sure that you have the hero image or that first image up with that white background, that your lifestyle images meet the requirements, that you have the right pixel count. It's not fully like my area of expertise, but I know that our creative team here, they're fantastic with being able to make sure that we have high quality, great photos that exceed Amazon standards and enable that to stay alive. If you don't do that, if you have products that fail to meet them, Amazon can either pull the pictures or they can pull the listing and force you to redo that content in order for you to be allowed back on the site again.
Got it. And so you've done all of this. Now, how do you protect your brand? I think you said number 6 was getting brand registry. So talk to our listeners, our viewers about brand registry and how do you protect your brand then?
Yep. So if you've been following the checklist and you did number 1 and you own the IP or you have authorization to sell as a third-party seller with it, using brand registry is a huge tool. First off, it allows you to lock down the content changes. So something that we've seen in the past is other sellers jump in and they think they can do a better job with the content and then they screw up the content, the messaging for your product. You want to say that it's you're targeting a specific customer segment and they decide they're going to target somebody else completely. Or, and I wish that this wasn't the case, but I've seen it happen a number of times, they're a competitor and they create an offer for your product and they add in stuff that's going to get it flagged by Amazon. False claims. They're going to add in pictures, for adult sex toys. Like, these are things that people do to it, and they can change that content fairly easily unless you have an ability to lock it down through brand registry. So you've got the trademark, from number one, my recommendation is you get the brand registry so you can lock that content down. You can portray your message. You can use your content, and you can prevent other third parties, whether malicious or just with a different idea, from changing that content to something that could cause problems. Because I've seen accounts go down for stuff that the seller themselves didn't add to listings, and that's incredibly frustrating.
I can imagine. Imagine. Right. Fantastic. These are like good. So you get. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. You were saying you were giving more tips.
Yeah. So with the brand registry, also it creates it makes it a lot easier to file against people who are infringing against you. So if you do end up with a counterfeiter, you've got a top selling product, you're selling a lot of stuff. You now have your trademark already entered into Amazon's system, and they give you a special tool that allows you to be able to file complaints directly against them, and it carries a higher likelihood of being able to take them down with that. It's much easier than using the publicly available tool that everyone else uses. And as a result, it allows you to protect your intellectual property rights from people who want to, again, prey off of what you've built. And the final piece, there's a lot of other stuff that's available through brand registry, a lot of additional tools that I think are covered in some of the other podcasts that are just really great to help you grow and build your brand. But really, from a compliance perspective, it's about controlling your content and making sure that you can take down bad actors who are trying to infringe on your intellectual property rights.
Perfect. So you've done all these steps 1 to 6. You've got your brand registry taken care of, your products live. Then you said number 7 was monitor customer feedback. So talk about that. Like what about customer feedback and taking action there to be compliant on Amazon?
Yeah. So Amazon likes to advertise that they are the most customer-centric marketplace in the world, and their actions back this up. So they monitor customer feedback, they listen to it. If you end up with a product that gets a whole bunch of 1 stars, it's probably going to be pulled down. They're going to require you to do a plan of action to get it reinstated, or they might just say, hey, like, we don't want this product being sold on our site. Customers don't like it. So if you're up there, you're live, you're selling, and a customer comes back and says, I thought it'd be bigger, or I'm selling a juicer, and I'm trying to juice celery, and it's just not working right. What do I do? Listen to what they're saying, take that feedback, and then try to find a way to use the content or your directions, or post a video that it does a better job explaining. One of the things that we often do for brands that have had issues with sizing before is you can actually do a comparison on a model. Like, hey, this is how big it is. Lifestyle photos are good for that kind of thing, so that people get a sense of the actual size of the product, the scale of the product, in order to be able to set expectations and reduce some of those defects. And it's important that you fix the defects of the issues of the product that are resulting in returns, and you get those returns down, because ultimately, if customers aren't satisfied with the product, A, you're not going to see sales. B, it can get that listing and or your account flagged, because Amazon tracks you on a whole set of metrics, and part of that is that customer feedback. And then C, around that too, I probably want to order in terms of answering questions, answering and responding to any messages that come through, etc. Like, it's important you're just following up, you're talking to customers, you're providing that great experience for customers on the site. A, because Amazon requires it, and B, because it's good for your brand.
And then related to that, I know number 8 was, monitoring your returns and ODR. I think it's pretty related to number 7 as well. So anything specific there on ODRs and returns that you should be monitoring?
Yeah, so like the order defect is different than customer feedback, in that it's another way of customers giving you feedback, but customer feedback normally comes in terms of leaving reviews on your product or reviews on your seller account, whereas order defect rate comes in terms of looking at the reasons why customers are returning a product. Are they returning it because item not as described? Okay, what in your listing is leading customers to think that it's not as described? And you can go back to the customer feedback you saw earlier to look at that. Are they sitting back and saying, hey, this is defective? Or maybe even, hey, this product caught on fire. Take those seriously, look at them. Amazon tracks it. You're allowed a 1% order defect rate. And if you go over that 1% order defect rate, that listing is coming down. And you may be able to get it back up with a plan of action to be able to get it reinstated, but you might not be able to. And so again, to be compliant, monitor that returns and that ODR, and see what you can do to kind of be proactive in addressing those issues before they become problems with compliance.
Awesome. Okay, and then number 9 that you had was to create a company policy for seller accounts and employees. So talk to our listeners about that.
So after you're monitoring your listings, you're making sure that you're listening to customers and that you're following up on the return reasons and making sure you're compliant with Amazon policies there. The next thing I would recommend companies do is make sure that their policies mirror Amazon's business solutions agreement to ensure that their employees are following the kind of practices that won't result in an accidental suspension. And again, I only bring this up because I've seen it happen before. So for instance, most sellers are only allowed to have one selling account, with a handful of exceptions for legitimate business needs, i.e. like you own 2 separate companies with different manufacturers and want to run 2 separate seller accounts, one for each brand separately. Like that's considered okay, and you can get permission to do that. But a lot of cases, what ends up happening is the seller's selling well and they start hiring employees because they're successful. But those employees seeing everything that's happening, they're like, like it's really lucrative to sell on Amazon, and they start up their own business, but they don't separate things. So they use their work computer to log on to their own personal selling account, or they're using their business connections that they have with their primary job on the side with the other one. And somehow Amazon ends up linking those 2 accounts and says, hey, we think you're operating with 2 selling accounts without a legitimate business reason, and they can suspend both accounts for that. Another one that we've seen happen quite a bit is customers leaving or employees leaving reviews on products that are sold by the customer. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be your employee. It could be the spouse or the kid of your employee who's just leaving a review because they really like the product you sell and they don't think it's going to matter. But if Amazon's associated those IP addresses altogether, that's a violation of their policy. They think you're trying to juice your reviews, and as a result, they can suspend that listing or suspend your account for it. So it's important that as part of like your HR handbook or your hiring practices that you have those policies in place are following through and following through with the rules you have to maintain in order to stay compliant with Amazon's business solutions agreement.
Yeah, this one's an interesting one, and I'm glad you put this in the checklist because it's so subtle and people will probably definitely forget about this one, right? Like when you're thinking about running your business, this is the last thing you probably care about is you're like, how does HR and the policies there sort of interact with the work that you're doing on Amazon. So this is a good one. And then let's go to number 10, which is the last one, which is all about like, reviewing Amazon's or make sure you're following Amazon's review policy. So talk about that one, Jed.
Yeah, so kind of just talking about what I was referencing earlier. What we've seen often is either accidentally or sometimes on purpose, sellers have realized that the algorithms favor products with lots and lots of reviews. And if you Google it, you'll see that there were entire organizations built around generating review for Amazon products. The problem is that erodes trust for the customers who want to buy products if they think that all of the reviews have been bought, or hey, it has 50 reviews, but they're all Jed's friends who reviewed the product, haven't actually used it, don't actually know anything about it. The product might not work, but 50 of Jed's friends reviewed it, and that's why it's popping up higher in the search results. So Amazon created a full policy around it, and you need to make sure not only that you understand it, but that you're following it to the letter. So one of the things a lot of sellers will use, and I would recommend that the sellers do this too, is that they use some kind of a service in order to solicit neutral feedback from customers. And there's some specific rules around it. We can get into more specifics maybe on a different podcast, and or if you're interested and you work with Caspian, by all means reach out. We'll be happy to have a conversation and help you make sure that the app you use is compliant. But what I would recommend is make sure that you're working with the legitimate apps that are out there, ones that you can find in the Amazon App Store, found through Seller Central. Those ones are going to be more likely to be compliant, and then review what they're offering and as far as reaching out and saying, hey, please do a review to make sure that it meets Amazon's policy. The second piece to that is make sure no one in your company is leaving or soliciting positive reviews on the products you sell. And that's in terms of not only using business resources, but also, even on their own. They might just, put it on their own personal social media. They throw it up on Instagram and say, hey, this is so awesome. Please leave us a positive review. And that can come back to haunt you guys when all the reviews get removed, or you end up with your, account being potentially suspended and having to submit a POA. And then finally,
that's awesome. Oh, good, good. Sorry.
Yeah, and then finally, just ensure all your requests for reviews are neutral. So you can say, hey, like where the gray line kind of gets crossed is people ask for positive reviews. If they're asking just for reviews and they're following the product specifically, you can still ask for reviews. It just needs to be a neutral request, and it can't be from your employees. It can't be from your employees' friends. It can't be from your friends or family. It has to be from people who are buying your product, who are using your product, who are leaving their honest feedback on your product, and that's how you build trust in your product, and that's how you stay compliant with Amazon's review policy.
Got it. That makes sense. I mean, Jed, this is fantastic. You've given everyone 10 tips at some level, a checklist that I think any business, whether you're selling first party directly as a brand, whether you're selling third party either directly or through a third party reseller, I mean, these are just fantastic tips and tricks. And I would, in fact, encourage some of our viewers, listeners to use this while interviewing agencies or interviewing different sellers out there and say, how do they kind of go through this process for your brand, especially if you're a brand trying to sell on Amazon. So this is very useful. So thank you, Jed. Again, a reminder to everyone, you can download this checklist, as part of this video somewhere, and definitely use this as you're building your business on Amazon to stay compliant with them. So Jed, thank you again for being on the show. I appreciate having you as usual, and we will see you again next time. But Jed, just want to say goodbye.
Thanks, Kunal. It's fun being here.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again soon on another episode of Master the Marketplace.
Through conversations with experts in online retail, with years of marketing, compliance, and inventory management experience, we seek to empower our listeners to master the marketplace. Thanks for listening. We hope to see you next time on Master the Marketplace with Caspian.